Hello, welcome to the Raise Your Volume podcast. I'm Tiphany Kane, your host. Yes, you heard that right. This used to be the Radical Audacity podcast, and we recently changed names, rebranded a little bit to get a little more into the true meaning of what it is I want to talk about, which is you and your voice and your volume. I'm Tiphany Kane, your host, and I have a really special guest for you today. I want to ask you a question before I tell you who this guest is. Is there anything you feel deep shame about? Anything you wouldn't want anybody else to know about? What is it? What could it be? We all have that, don't we? We all have that little skeleton in the closet that we don't want to tell people about. Maybe it's alcohol abuse. Maybe it's drug abuse. Maybe it's not graduating high school or going to college. Maybe it's not wanting to be married anymore. Maybe it's, who knows what it could be. Maybe it's having to go through rehab or having to go through humiliating drug testing. Whatever it is, we all have a little something, don't we? Well, my guest today has all of those things I mentioned are part of her story, and part of her story that she used to hide and decided, I'm not hiding this anymore. And her courage and her generosity of spirit and her beautiful vulnerability all show up in this interview today. And I'm really, really excited for you to hear it. My guest today is Laura Cathcart Robbins. Now, Laura Cathcart Robbins has been around for a while. She's pretty incredible. She has a podcast, super successful podcast called The Only One in the Room. She is a writer. You've probably read some of her things in various magazines, HuffPost, and things of that sort. She is a trustee at the Buckley School, and she does a lot of work around diversity, equity, inclusion. She's given a TED Talk that is incredible. She's been on the Tamron Hall show. She's been recognized by Oprah, New York Times. This is an amazing, accomplished woman, and she just wrote her memoir and released it. Her memoir is called Stash, My Life in Hiding, and it's about 10 months of her life where she realized that her addiction to Ambien has become a major problem, and she needs to go into recovery for it. At the same time, she's realizing that her marriage is ending, and she needs to get a divorce and starts going through the divorce process. And in that 10-month period, she falls in love. This is an incredible book, and it's a crown jewel on her already immense treasure trove of work that she's already put out there. On top of that, Laura is a beautiful human. I have had the absolute pleasure of knowing her, meeting her in person multiple times, bumping up against her in several situations. And every single time, she is just a lovely, generous, incredible human being. I had the pleasure of coordinating an event for one of her book readings, and it was such a beautiful experience. She's truly one of those people that feels good to be around. There's no awkwardness when you're in Laura's presence. And I think you're going to feel that come through in the interview today. So I'm excited for you to listen. Enjoy the episode. Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here today with Laura Cathcart Robbins. As I told you in the bio, she is a woman of many talents and just an incredible human being. And I am so thrilled to have you here today, Laura. Welcome to the Raise Your Volume podcast.
Tiphany, thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for just kind of like making sure that we connected way back when so that we could eventually now have this conversation. I'm really excited.
Okay, so I want to talk about that connection really quick
Yeah.
before we dive too deep into your story. You are somebody that the first time I heard about you was actually on stage. You were at Podfest Expo and giving a talk, a panel discussion, and you immediately stood out to me as somebody I was like, oh, I would love to talk to her. And I saw you kind of bounced around you, but I never came up and introduced myself. And then my partner and I started doing podcast meetups and things of that sort. And we were having one in LA, and your book just got released. And I thought,
Yes.
oh, maybe I should reach out to Laura. I think she would be wonderful. She's a local podcaster. I'd love to, get a chance to meet her and have people hear about her book and stuff. And Laura, you were so beautiful through that whole process. And here's what stood out to both David and I. David's my partner. When you came to that book reading at our podcast meetup, you made it a point to know everybody's name, even the people that worked at the bookshop. You called them by name. Everybody you met, you called them by name. You brought them into your embrace. And I'm bringing this up right now because when we dive into your book and some of the themes in your book, it is overwhelmingly incredible to me. This Laura that I met and that I've gotten to know since that time, your warmth, your compassion, your genuineness, your generosity with your time and spirit and energy is a beautiful thing to experience. And so I bring this up because that's not where you started. You started in hiding, as you like to say. Your book is called Stash My Life in Hiding. Before we dive too much into your book, I'd love to know right now, where you're at right now in this beautiful generosity of spirit and just openness. How does it feel right now being there from where you were?
Yeah, I think, first of all, thank you for that. That was really beautiful. And, it's funny because you just don't know how you're being perceived. Or I should say, I don't always know how I'm being perceived. And to be fair, if there had been 30 more people there, I'm sure I couldn't have called everybody by name. But it was exactly the right size. I do like to know people's names. I like people to know that I see them, and it's just kind of my way. I also, during the period that I write about, which is the year 2008, I was that way then. This is why I was asked to be Parent Association president. This is why I was asked to join the board. This is why I was asked to, be engaged in so many different activities authentically. This person that wants to know everybody's name, that wants people to be seen, that, that there's a generosity of spirit that I think that I have authentically. It was definitely dampened during my addiction, but it didn't go away entirely. And so what it feels like now, after having lived two, the double life is it's kind of cliche. I don't even know if that covers what I lived, because I had to so compartmentalize one way that I was in order to be the other. And that switch was, at the end, it wasn't even a switch. It was just, I was the Laura I didn't want to be at the very end. I had a very difficult time being the Laura that I was authentically. So being where I am now, and what my life looks like almost 15 years later, next month, I will be 15 years sober. I will be 15 years with this man that I fell in love with in treatment. I will be, I'm a mom in very similar ways to the way that I was a mom then, but without the work.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just get all the smushy, wonderful stuff with my kids. I don't have to do. So I have this, I wake up with this gratitude. I do a meditation every morning, and in that meditation, I try to summon um, generosity and curiosity to carry with me through the day. How generous can I be? How curious can I be? It makes me a better listener, makes me more patient, which are things that I want for myself. And then at the end of the day, I'm overwhelmed almost without fail by gratitude for this freedom that I have, and that I get to live the way that I believe that I was made to authentically live.
That's so beautiful, Laura. Your generosity and curiosity for sure come out. Along with that, very true vulnerability, just an openness. You just have an openness that feels genuine and true. So I want to thank you for that, because that's not a super safe feeling place to be, which is why so many people don't go there, or they dampen it, or what have you, with whether it's some form of addiction, whether it's food addictions or alcohol addictions or drug addictions or shopping addictions or love and sex addictions. Like, we all have our way of hiding that vulnerable side of us. Every single one of us has that. I want to ask you, there's so much I want to ask you, Laura. I could talk to you for 27 hours and not know enough. I think where I want to start is this idea of your life in hiding. And it started very young for you. The scene in the book where you are hiding and listening at the party, and your stepfather is there, and your mother, and it just starts so early with you having to hide. I'm asking this question because I feel that many of us live our lives with feeling like there are definitely parts of ourselves we have to hide. And we probably learned it very, very young. And we have to be very quiet about these parts of ourselves. So I'm just interested. I don't think I have a very specific question. I think I'm just interested in that young Laura that felt she needed to hide, and hearing a little bit more about her and what she was protecting herself from.
Yeah, I mean, and thank you for mentioning the vulnerability part. This is not something that comes naturally to me. It doesn't come naturally. I'm a very private person, which seems to be in direct conflict with this book I wrote. But if you talk to me, if you were to meet me and talk to me somewhere, you wouldn't come away thinking, oh, she's such a vulnerable person. I think I skew more toward guarded, actually, in my day-to-day conversations. But when I have a purpose, like if I talk about this might help X, Y, and Z, then I'm able to access that vulnerability. But I am really private, and this is how so many people in my life, most of the people in my life, had no idea what was going on with me, even after I got sober. They just didn't know, because I didn't start hiding or start, I was always like that. I was always guarded. I was always never an oversharer. I was never inspired to share because someone else did. It was always measured. And I think some of that is how I am authentically, but certainly a good deal of it came from the fact that I was in an emotionally abusive relationship with my stepfather that started at a really young age. And I want to just mention that it wasn't like he and I were at each other all the time, or that he was on me all the time. There were a lot of things that I could have written about, that I actually did write about, that didn't make the book because we didn't have long to write about him. And we needed to understand one thing from our relationship. And that one thing we needed to understand was why I hid.
Mm-hmm.
So all the other stuff that I learned from him, like I learned to love jazz through him. Like I learned all these other amazing things that are part of me through him, but they didn't make the book because this was the one thing we needed to learn from him. So it's very, it's not one-sided. It's just very focused on this thing, which is that the way that I was, authentically seemed to rub him the wrong way. That really curious little girl got on his nerves, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And so I learned, because he was abusive toward me emotionally, but he was physically abusive toward my mother. And when I got on his nerves less, there were less explosions in my house. It was less violent. So there was never like someone told me, you can't be like that. But I learned that when I was like that, things got bad in my home. And when I wasn't like that, things
Mm-hmm.
were not only tolerable, but they were nice sometimes. So I edited myself. And it came very easily to me. It didn't seem to come at a cost. I was already doing it because I was the only Black kid in my school at that time. It was a primarily white space. I lived in a middle class Black neighborhood. We weren't middle class. We were really poor. Like we were welfare poor, but my mom got me a scholarship to go to this school, and we rented like the smallest place in this middle class Black neighborhood. So when I came home to my neighbors, all my friends were Black. When I was at school, all my friends were white. They were they were definitely both my friends, but I learned that there were certain things I would do in my Black neighborhood that I wouldn't do at school because it raised eyebrows. And there were certain things that I wouldn't do with my Black friends because it raised the same eyebrows. Why are you talking white? Like that kind of thing. So I learned to edit and to
Mm-hmm.
adjust, as needed. So I was already practicing that. So doing it for him, um, again, just kind of seemed naturally, and I wasn't aware of the cost of it, until I got sober
Mm-hmm.
at age 44, you know, and then started to look at that stuff. And, a lot of it, I was a kid and I didn't have a choice. It was survival. But certainly as I got into my latter teens and early adulthood, I made those choices even still.
Mm-hmm.
I continued to choose to protect myself in the same way that I protected myself at age 5, but yet there wasn't that same threat in my life. I didn't have an adult in my life that I needed to protect myself from, but I continued to guard and keep this, I call it a plexiglass wall in the
Mm-hmm.
book between me and everyone else. They could see and find, but they couldn't get close.
Yeah, you have that phrase, is it give them nothing?
Yes.
Give them nothing.
Give
Give
them
them
nothing.
nothing. It made me curious because the generosity that you have,
Mm.
that I've personally experienced in you, I kept hearing in the book, in the give them nothing, that was a part of you had to pull back, and a part of you that probably kept you separate from the people that loved you most in your life. Like there were certain parts where I was like, I wonder if she was able to be vulnerable and whole and open with her husband, if he would have accepted and loved. We don't know. We don't know, right? Like I don't know. But or if you wouldn't have married him and you would have married somebody else that would have accepted you exactly as you were. We don't know. Like I'm not trying
Yeah.
to rewrite
Yeah.
history or ask that stuff, but I often wonder, I think the shame that we create for ourselves silences us so much and creates these barriers and doesn't allow us to create relationships. And I'm just wondering, that to me, that was a theme that kept happening throughout the book, of almost people wanting to reach out to you and you saying, nope, give them nothing, give them nothing. I am not, even in therapy, even in rehab, even,
Mm. Especially in rehab.
especially.
Yes.
Will you talk a little bit more about that? Give them nothing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that I did talk to some of my friends. I don't have very many friends from childhood, from like before age 12, but after age 13, I'm in touch with those friends and my young adult friends. And I talked to them about what kind of person, how they saw me
Mm-hmm.
during that time. Um, each of them described a very vulnerable, open, like giving person. And I think that the way that I fooled everybody in a way was that I am, authentically a giving person. I was never the taker in the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And so by never being the taker, I got the luxury of this impression, this I could be, if there were, roles in the relationship, because I was the giver. They called me for advice. They called me when things were, going badly for them. They called me when they were grieving. There wasn't an expectation because of the roles we had that I would be calling them with any of that stuff. And I didn't. I don't think I knew how to do that at the time, but I was very happy with the roles. I never thought, oh, I wish I could call so and so and tell them what's going on. That never occurred to me.
Mm-hmm.
That would have made me really uncomfortable. So the perception was that I was this generous, warm person who was of great help to her friends and the people. Like I was a really good friend. This
Mm-hmm.
was the perception. Um, and I was, in a way, but there wasn't any equity, not equity, but maybe equity. We weren't equal partners in the
Mm-hmm.
friendship because I only gave and didn't receive. They gave and received. And so and I liked it that way. When it's my default, it's still my default 15 years later, when someone starts to poke around in an area where I'm not ready to reveal something, I shut down.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the gates come down on one of those storefronts and they lock. And you're like, what happened? I can't get in. Um, but you messed up. You asked me the wrong question. And so, so you get nothing. Um, and I really do make an effort not to allow that to happen now, but to really go within myself and see why I'm so uncomfortable. Like
Oh.
why did that question put me on edge? Why do I resent that person for asking that question? And sometimes that means I can't respond in real time. I have to say something like, I hear you. And or I understand what you're asking of me, but you're going to need to give me a minute before I can respond.
Mm.
And that way I'm being truthful,
Mm-hmm.
because my knee jerk would be to lie so that I could get the heat off of me, to get them away from me. And I also take the time that I need to come back as my whole self. And sometimes people don't need my whole self.
Mm.
It depends on how close the relationship is or what the dynamic is. Sometimes they don't need all of me, but I do come to them truthfully.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll let them know I'm not going there with you
Mm.
because this is not the nature of our relationship, but I will say this, or this. And that's uncomfortable for sure. But the discomfort that I'm in once I start playing with the truth or guarding myself in a way that's not healthy for me, is that discomfort is the discomfort that threatens my serenity,
Mm-hmm.
my gratitude, my curiosity. And when
Mm-hmm.
those things are threatened, it's possible that I might need something to quiet that disturbance within me.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing I'm going to reach for is not a drug and not a drink. But if I start reaching for stuff, those could be down the line for me. And I don't want to go anywhere near that. So I do this work over here to be as honest as I can about what I'm feeling in the moment, and give myself that space to respond in a way that makes sense for me, but still respond.
Oh, and that's such hard work. That
Yes.
is such hard work to do that. Brene Brown talks about levels of vulnerability and how people earn it, right? And
Yes.
and it's perfectly okay to be a beautifully vulnerable person and still say, well, this is how much you've earned.
Yes.
So these
Yes.
are my boundaries on this vulnerability. And I think a lot of the mistake people make when they are like, okay, I need to open up and not be so guarded is they vomit
Yeah.
vulnerability to where it's actually not very authentic. People haven't earned it and shouldn't be there. So that's hard. That's hard to learn. That's hard to know.
Right. And then you get that vulnerability hangover.
Yes.
Like, and you're ruminating on everything you said, and you want to call back or text back and say, can you keep this to yourself? Or I didn't mean
Mm-hmm.
it this way, or I shouldn't have said this, like whatever it is. And that's why I take that time. Because I am unpracticed at being vulnerable. I
Mm-hmm.
know this about myself. I never did it. And because I'm unpracticed, it has happened more than once that I have engaged that way where I've said too much. I've given too much to someone who hasn't earned it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's regret. That regret is a disturbance, which brings
Yeah.
me closer to a drink.
Yes.
So, everything has to be with my eye on that tiger sleeping in the back of my cage. Like, I don't want to wake it up.
Mm-hmm.
So everything that I do either brings me further away from that tiger or closer to it.
Mm-hmm.
Everything. The meditation that I do in the morning, the workout that I do, like the alone time that I carve out for Scott and I, the time that I spend with my kids and my parents, like all of that, or don't spend with my kids or my parents, all that brings me closer or further away.
Mm-hmm. Mm. The time that you take to learn that about yourself is so amazing and important, and a very
Mm.
good lesson for every single one of us listening, that it is important to take that time and learn that what are our boundaries, what is going to push us closer to the tiger sleeping in our cage. I think that is incredible. Um, there's so much I want to talk about.
No shade on tigers, by the way.
Right? They're
They're
pretty cool.
beautiful animals.
They're pretty cool. They're pretty cool. But
Yeah.
they can be a little
Yeah.
deadly.
I guess they can.
There was there's a couple lines in here that I wanted to read and share with you, that I think I'm trying to figure out exactly where I want to go with this, Laura, because there's so much depth I want to get into. But I loved your TED Talk about being the only one in the room. It touched me in such a way and gave me this shift in my understanding, right? Which I value people that say, hey, look at this a little differently. Can you see a little different perspective? I like to surround myself with people that do that for me. I don't want people mirroring back what I already know. As I like to say, my truth isn't necessarily the truth. And I like to hear everybody's truths. We all have our truths, and I like to understand. So your TED Talk touched me so deeply. And that was my original intention when I asked you on, was I just wanted to dig into that TED Talk.
Thank
But
you.
then I read your book and I'm like, oh my God, the book is so good. I want to dig into the book. But I think we can bridge the two. Your podcast is called The Only One in the Room, and your TED Talk was on that topic. And I feel like those themes ran through your book as well. So your book takes place, correct me if I'm wrong, in about a 10-month period.
Yeah.
When you realize that your addiction to Ambien has gone out of control, you also realize you can no longer stay in your marriage. And so you are rehabbing, going through a divorce, you fall in love in rehab. Like, it's a whole thing. And you're still so passionately, madly in love with being a mother and trying so desperately to be the mother that you want to be. And it comes through so much in this book. And your only one in the room theme runs through this.
Yes.
from your parents were hippies, despite being African American, to your stepfather making you feel like you have to hide and be the only quiet one in the room, to being a privileged Black woman
Mm-hmm.
in Los Angeles, often the only Black woman in the room in strange places, to being lots of situations where you felt like you were the only one in the room, whether you were or not. You may not have known, but with your education, the dropping out of high school and things of this sort that just kept making you feel this theme of, well, there's nobody else like me here, even in rehab. Well, there's nobody
Mm-hmm.
else here. Like, I really don't belong here. I'm the only one here with this issue. So I would love to talk about that intersection of the only one in the room and this book, because that is definitely an underlying theme throughout your book.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing up the TEDx talk. I'm incredibly proud of that. And those are like hard to, anyway, I'm very proud of it. You just brought to mind, so I write about being asked to join the board of my kids' school. At the time I joined the board, it was an all white board. I was the only Black one. So I was literally the only one in the room for our board meetings. But when it's graduation time, the trustees are there on stage to witness the graduates, and we're in cap and gowns as well. And each one of the trustees wears the colors from their school. And like if you have a graduate degree, then there's the color of that. And so you have all these colors draped down your back, the more degrees you have. Mm-hmm. And because I had no diploma, nor did I have any degree, I was always relegated to wearing a single collar that was Buckley's colors. That was the school that my kids went to. And so I'd be standing backstage as the only Black one, also the only one visibly without an education. For the first time, no one could ever see my lack of education until that moment when we all step out on stage and everybody has these long kind of peacock tails behind them and I have none. And I just thought, wow, this is, I never thought about this. I never anticipated anybody be able to see that I don't have an education. And, this is something that I had hidden my whole life. And then obviously I didn't hide it anymore there because one, I was sober and I was telling the truth, but even if I wanted to, I couldn't have. And this is the kind of thing, you're right, that I've lived with my entire life. And, there is something about representing. I was the first Black PA president since like 1972 or 3. And so I got this woman, this Black woman, one of the few Black parents there when I got named PA president, who wagged her finger in my face and said, you're representing us all now. And I was really offended by how she did it. I didn't appreciate that at all, but her message was real. I was representing them all, not just the parents in the school, but I was representing Black people everywhere for these people, right? How I conducted myself, what I said, what I did, everything mattered. But in another way that I actually didn't think about until later, but during my tenure there, I was representing, like, finally, after, decades, Black people did have a seat at the table because I did. I was representing people who didn't have a college degree at that graduation ceremony. Yes. Right. I had a voice at the table despite the fact that I'm Black and uneducated and a drug addict and in recovery, like all these, and divorce, like all these things that felt like scarlet letters on my chest. Not the Blackness, but everything else. I could represent. And in that way, I could be helpful, because even though I was visibly, literally, at times the only one in the room, it wasn't going to be forever. Someone else was going to be in that room who was the same in one way or another, who would be able to look and have an example of someone that went ahead of them. And these people, these trustees who were judges, who were captains of industry, who were attorneys, could look at this woman who was a mom at that point. That's what I was. I was a stay-at-home mom who didn't have a career, who didn't have an education, and be like, well, when Laura was here, blah, 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 and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. So they then have a frame of reference.
Yes.
And so the education continues, right? And if I were to run from those situations and hide, I would be doing a disservice not only to myself, but to the others who might come after me. So this only one in the room experience that I've had my entire life is a burden. It absolutely is. But it's also a tool that I can use. And so that's I'm transferring my thoughts and the way I view this burden into creating a tool for myself and for others. And that was the reason for the TEDx talk. That's the reason for the podcast, The Only One in the Room, is that I don't know if transference is the right word, but it's that conversion, that alchemy, right? It was this and I want to make it into this.
Mm-hmm. I got very emotional listening to you say that. Very emotional, because we are so often taught or led to believe by society that there is this one way to do things, and that if you don't do it that way, it's not the right way and you'll never be successful. And
Yes.
You're just continually smashing that. I mean, we didn't even touch on it yet, but yes, you were a mom at the time, but you also had your own PR agency before you became a mom without having graduated high school or gone to college. Like, you were a successful PR agency. So many things that you have smashed as you go through your life, where you are telling people there's not just one way to be in this life. Even your divorce, you went through it in a way that was very authentic, and have lived your life afterward in a way that a lot of people wouldn't understand, but it was right for you. And you're saying, look, there's not just this one way to be divorced and to be a family after. There's new ways to do this. And I just, it makes me emotional. I literally have tears in my eyes. My mascara is running. Sorry. It's so beautiful to hear you say that. So thank you.
Thank you for saying that.
And thank you for doing it. It's not easy.
No, it's not easy. And I can't always be the only one either. Like, I have to take breaks. There's that expression that Black women, you never have to ask a Black woman if she's tired. Black women are exhausted, period. We are. We carry all of these burdens all the time. And if we're paying attention to what's going on in the world, we are angry as well as exhausted and frustrated and hurt. I get my feelings hurt when I read the news, when I watch the news, when I look at Twitter, when I look at Instagram. I get hurt so often by what's going on in the world. Anger is not my first go-to. It's just like, wow, people really think that about people who look like me. And that's just devastating. And then I think about my sons, and who are visibly Black, like they present as Black. So what they are out in the world is different than who they actually are, which is this combination of their dad and I, who's white. And, whatever they've grown up with, whatever privilege they've grown up with, isn't visible when they're pulled over, which they both have been several times, much to my chagrin. Oh my goodness.
Oh my God. The mom heart.
I mean, and I actually, I don't say this very often because I don't get the opportunity, but the police officers who have pulled them over many times in the past have all been kind. And they have seen my sons as humans, usually as young men or boys, who are in the carpool lane without a passenger, or speeding through something or not stopping all the way at a stop sign, they've let them off with warnings. Sometimes they've issued tickets, which they should,
Mm-hmm.
but always with kindness, never any drama. My boys have not felt unsafe.
Oh, thank goodness.
And thank goodness. And I know that's not everybody's experience, but I don't hear this experience ever getting talked about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still afraid
Yeah.
because I know it exists out there. But so far, this is what they've been met with out in the world.
Thank goodness.
Mm-hmm.
Our boys are not far apart in age, and I feel
Oh,
you on that.
how old are yours?
My oldest is turning 18.
Yeah.
He's on his
Yeah.
third car. He's managed to total several cars. So
Oh, yes.
I feel you on. But I talk to him all the time. You are a tall, good-looking, well-educated white boy. You need to walk through the world understanding that this is not everybody's experience, and just listen and ask questions and listen. We're running short on time.
Yes.
There is one part of your book, if you're okay, I would like to read it out loud.
Yes, please.
Highlighted it and put a star on it and a bookmark on it because I felt like the power in this passage was just incredible. This is a conversation with your therapist. She says, before you hid with drugs and alcohol, before that you hid behind your children. Now you have nothing to hide behind, and it's scary. When your stepfather preyed on little Laura, you needed to hide. This hiding was a coping mechanism that saved your life. Thank God for it, but now you're grown and he is dead, and you don't need the survival skill all the time anymore, yes? Perhaps it is time to say goodbye to it, but gently. This hiding is an old, imaginary friend who kept you safe. Margarita is still talking, but suddenly I am floating outside my body. All I've ever done is hide. When someone gets too close to discovering the truth, any truth about me, I do one of two things, leave or lie. This whole time, I've been so busy blaming others for why I have to hide. I blamed Kenny for my inability to trust anyone. I've blamed my shameful addiction on the long line of alcoholics that I come from on my father's side. Is it really time to leave hiding behind? Who would I be if I stopped? Will anyone care to know the real me, whoever that turns out to be? Like even reading that now, like I want to cry. So what is your answer? Will anyone want to know the real you, whoever that turns out to be?
Oh, I think the answer is a resounding yes. I got this beautiful letter from my friend who I went to meet after that session, my Sex in the City girls, I call them in the book. And she wrote me this letter a couple of weeks ago about how she saw me then. And she's like, you didn't know, but all we wanted to do was love you. And this is all we want to do now. And you were so precious to us. And she was speaking for the group, this small group of my friends. And she's like, I feel bad, that we didn't know. I know that you hid it, but I feel bad that we didn't know and we weren't able to help. But basically just that with or without whatever I was doing to protect myself, I was loved. And I'm also not just loved. And I think love is really important, obviously, but I'm also liked. Like there's, which can be very separate for me. I can love people that I don't really like that much, but I love them. I have family members like that. Don't personalize this, family members, if you're listening. But I love them to death, but I don't really like to hang around them because it's just not pleasant.
Yeah.
And what she was saying to me is it is pleasant to hang around me. She desires my company, not just because she loves me, but because she likes me as I am, without any hope of change. Like just like this, as imperfect as I am. So that, yes, the answer is yes.
That's so beautiful. And you know what? I can see it in your book design. This is not a book that's hiding. right?
No.
So it's the title is Stash My Life in Hiding, but this is a bright pink book that you can see
Yes.
on any bookshelf. It's not going to hide or get lost on the bookshelf. It's
Yes.
to me, as I looked at this book design, I thought, this is Laura's way of saying, I'm not in hiding.
Mm-hmm.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
out, and I'm colorful, and I'm imperfect, and I'm perfect in my imperfection, and I'm here, and
Yeah.
this is me. And
Yes.
you can love me or not, but this is me. And I just thought it was
Absolutely.
beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, the cover was a journey in and of itself, but I really did. I wanted it. I wanted to stand out on bookshelves, but I also wanted to do exactly what you just said. It's like you're not going to have to guess what this book is about.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to see it right on the cover. She's wearing the wedding ring. Her hand is brown. There are pills on the cover. Like everything you kind of need to know that I might not have wanted you to know is right there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know what you're getting into.
Mm. Thank you, Laura. I could continue talking about this book, talking about your TED Talk, talking about your podcast. Your podcast is phenomenal.
Thank you.
I could continue talking about all that for hours, and hopefully we get to talk a lot more in the future.
Yes.
But right now, we're going to shift into a little bit of a different part of the podcast where people get to know a little different side of you. We're going to get fun. We've done some deep, heavy talking.
Yes.
So you are a reader and a writer, and I'm really curious to know, what book are you reading right now?
I just happen to have it right here.
Yay!
It is Hey Hun by Emily Lynn Paulson. The subtitle is Sales, Sisterhood, Supremacy, and the other lies behind multi-level marketing. Today is her pub day, and I get to do an event with her. So fun. I just finished reading this book because I'm going to sit together and have a conversation, and it's really interesting. I actually had to look up MLM because I had no idea what it was. I don't know anything about multi-level marketing, but apparently it's very big business.
Oh,
and she was one of the leaders in the sales force of this, not in the owning of it. Mm-hmm. And she is telling all, and it's juicy.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's good.
So that's what I'm reading right now.
Excellent. I'm glad the doors are being sprung wide open on that stuff. Whew. Okay. So next question. They're making the movie of your life, Laura, which I actually can see happening from this book. So we're not far off, but they're making the movie of your life, and you get to pick 3 songs for the soundtrack. What would it be?
I think one would be Taylor Swift's Love Story. Mm. One would be Beyonce's America Has a Problem. Mm. And the last one might be SZA's I Just Killed My Ex. It might be that.
Do we want to know the background of that?
No. No, we don't. We'll just leave that there. That's kind of a joke one, but it is a song that I really like. And for some reason, I really click with those lyrics. And I actually haven't had that. Obviously, I haven't killed my ex. This would be a different podcast. But I get it. Like kind of the same way you were talking about, like, an addiction memoir wouldn't be your thing normally, but you get into there and you identify with certain things. Like I don't identify with the feelings of wanting to kill anyone, but there's something about the vibe of that song that I'm just like, yes, I get all of this. So
it's so fun to have outlets for the rage that we so often have to suppress and work through and not let out. I mean, you talk about one of your rage incidents. We can't get into it right now, but in rehab, you had an incident where you had to learn how to or it was one of your meetings,
Yeah.
you had to suppress your rage.
Yes.
And it was
Yes.
boiling inside you. And I was right there with you, like, man, I wanted to punch that guy in the face too. Like, I was with you on that. And so sometimes I think it's fun to just have an outlet for the rage that we just can't really let out.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw that guy the other day. So weird. I hadn't seen him in years.
Oh my God.
And yeah, he's not been doing well. And I was checking myself, like, do I still feel that resentment? And I just really didn't feel anything but compassion for him. And maybe some pity, but those two things for sure. But it was weird. I hadn't seen him like literally for a decade, probably.
Wow.
And then now the book's out and he's resurfaced.
That's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
Yeah, you got to read the book to find out what he did.
I was just going to say, we're not going to give away who this man is and why the rage. But I guarantee everybody that reads that part of the book is going to empathize
feel that.
with your rage. Absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, final question. You actually talked about your voice, having the voice at the table and finally giving voice to people that are the only ones in the room. And I'm really interested in hearing, what is the most recent thing you've done where you have raised the volume of your voice about something you're really passionate about?
I mean, like speaking up for myself, or
there's so many ways to raise your volume. So whatever comes to mind first.
I think that throughout this whole publishing process, I felt like I had to defend my voice. There were things that people were like, maybe she could say it like this. I'm like, no, she can't. Because that's not the way a Black person would have said it in that moment. And that's not the way I would have said it. So we're going to say it the way it was said. And you know, that kind of choosing my battles with it, but really protecting, like, I think that in this book, my story is really important, but I feel like my voice is the most important piece of this book, that I got to tell you, the reader, the story exactly as I experienced it in my own words. I do that through the italics, through the internal dialogue. And so you read about what everyone else saw, and then you hear my voice in the book. And so I wrote it that way. And then I feel like I had to defend it throughout the publishing process to keep that. And what I like to do going forward is switch from defending it to just standing up for it. Because I don't want to be on the defensive with it. This is how it is, you know, and so that's either a good fit or it isn't for you or the publishing house or the editor or like whoever it is. This is how the voice is. I'm all in for things that make things, you know, a lot of things I wrote needed to be explained. Like neither my editor nor my agent understood why I needed to take drugs into treatment. And I was like, really? I was a junkie. Like, that's what junkies do, but they didn't know. So I needed to explain it. I'm all for that. Like, give me those edits, but don't take away my voice. My voice stays.
Thank you for that, Laura. Thank you. There's so many ways to raise the volume on our voice, and that being true to your voice is one of the most important things you can do. Also, side note, I read your book and also had it on Audible. I bought the audiobook version. Hearing your voice tell your story doesn't get much more powerful than that. So I highly recommend readers get the book and the audiobook because, Laura, you have a beautiful voice, and you telling your own story in your own voice, I think, is really important. And for me, especially as a white woman hearing a Black woman's story, I want to hear your voice. I don't want to put my voice on your voice, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. No,
so it was
totally
very
does.
important for me to hear your voice reading it.
Thank you. Thank you for that. You'll hear all the cringy bits where I do other people's voices in the audiobook. I was just like, no, I can't do my therapist voice. They're like, you have to. So I like the Greek accent. Oh my goodness. But I did my best. But yes, it was really nice to do my voice in my voice.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't listened to the whole thing yet, honestly, because of the other voices I do. But I've been told that they're probably not as bad as I think they are, and I should just listen.
You did a great job. You really
Thank
did
you.
a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. I really appreciate this time with you. And I'm just so grateful that you're here. And I know my listeners really appreciate you as well. I am going to put all of the links to your book and your TED Talk and your podcast in the show notes. Everybody, please make sure you follow those. Is there somewhere else you'd like people to go to follow your work?
I mean, I think the only place I really live on social media is Instagram, and that's at Laura Cathcart Robbins. That's CATHCARTROBBINS. I'm other places, but I don't really check. So I get a lot of DMs there, and I always respond. So if anyone reads the book and then wants to have a conversation with me on social media, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. And I mean, we have to say, when you go on Instagram, you'll see Oprah. She's been on Oprah. She's been in New York Times. She's been, oh my goodness, all over the place. Tamron Hall show. Like, woo.
Thank you.
Laura.
Thank you.
It's amazing. Thank you so much for your time. I'll put all of those links in the show notes so people can find you. I know they're going to want to. This has been a joy today. Thank you.
It has. Thank you, Tiphany.
This was an incredible interview, wasn't it? I was brought to tears on multiple occasions. Laura's generosity and openness and willing to share her experience really touched me to my core. There are a few things that stood out to me that I want to talk about and hear your thoughts on. I want to know what you think of this. First of all, I want to talk about this, what Laura said about being the only one in the room. I think this is one of the most important things that she said that I feel every single one of us can take away from this conversation. She talked about being the only one in the room is both a burden and an opportunity. She was the only one on that board of trustees that didn't graduate high school and didn't go to college. And yet there she was up there in this very honored position. And she had to be very visible with these things that she had kept hidden. The fact that she didn't graduate high school, the fact that she didn't go to college, she had to keep hidden. She managed to have a very successful PR career and not let anybody know. She was in a marriage for more than a decade and her husband didn't know. And yet here she is standing on stage with the board of trustees as the only Black woman, the only person up there visibly representing that she didn't have a college that she attended. And she stood there and said, yes, this is me, and I am opening the door for other people like me. And I think this is such an important concept for every single one of us. I am leaving this conversation with Laura being more aware of how I interact with people and how I open the door for them to be exactly who they are and for that to be a good thing. I don't want people to feel like they're the only one in the room or that they have to pave the way for other people or that they don't feel supported in what they're doing. I would love for every one of us to be able to metaphorically stand up on stage and say, yes, this is me. This is me. Whatever visible representation there is of those things I used to be ashamed about and used to make me feel like I stood out, no more. This is me, and it's okay. There's not just one way to go through life. There's not just one way to be successful. There's not one way to be a woman. There's not one way to be a mother. There's not one way to be an advocate. There's not just one way to be a wife or a woman after divorce or to have a mixed family a blended family. There's not one way to be an author. There's not one way to be a podcaster. There's not one way to be an artist. There are so many paths to these things. And that to me was the power of what Laura said. In her standing up and saying, this is me. And yes, you can visibly see this is me, these things I used to hide. I'm here. It was so powerful. I also loved how she said she doesn't want to get to the place where she is defending her voice. She wants to get to the place where this is her voice. And you can take it or leave it. Oh, wasn't that powerful? So many times we go through life defensive of who we are and of our voice. I mean, so many of us have been raised to be quiet and not heard and feel ashamed for our passion or our zeal or our curiosity. Laura was made to feel shame for her curiosity as a young child. She was taught she had to hide, right? And so many of us have had similar experiences. But to stand up and not only defend your voice and fight for your voice and say, I have the right to be here with my voice, but to then say, this is my voice, to claim that voice and own it and be there. Oh, that is power. That is power. I also want to acknowledge what Laura said about Black women in society. Yes, they are tired. Yes. And all of us, it is our job to help people that are fighting so hard for their rights and are just left and right being knocked across the head with people's bigotry and closed-mindedness. If we have the voice and we have the ability to get our voice out there, it is our duty to do that and not put it all on the shoulders of the people who are at the forefront of this bigotry, right? Like the people who are getting the brunt of this bigotry. For those of us that have the privilege of having a voice without that bigotry being pointed at us, it is our duty to get out there and say the things that need to be said and get that message out there and support our incredible tired friends, whether they're Black women that are tired or LGBTQ friends that are tired, or it's our immigrant friends that are tired. They're getting beat up left and right. And it is our job to raise our voice and do what we can to change things. Things need to change. This isn't okay. That's my little soapbox rant. Thank you so much for being here today. I cannot wait to hear from you about what you took away from this episode. There's so much. We could talk for hours. There's so much that Laura shared with us. I want to hear from you what stood out to you. So please feel free. You know, you can DM me on Instagram, send me a message of some sort. I'd love to hear from you. Also, there is a link in the show notes that you can click on to leave a message. You can leave a little voice message and let me know. What did you think of this conversation with Laura today? What stood out to you? And as always, my friends, I want to say, raise the volume of your voice. I'm listening.